Good morning. Good morning. A few weeks ago, I was in Houston and I attended a Bridges to Life fundraiser. And immediately following my friend and myself, Albert Yance, we held a conversation. And in this day and time, there is so much help being poured out, at least in Texas, for people who have been incarcerated. But the question he and I discussed is, what is the value of this help? Because on one level, a lot of my friends, including myself, we want to give back because at some point in our life we were just takers, but now we're givers. But in the midst of needing a job and having responsibilities and high gas costs, we asked ourselves the question, at some point, should people who have been incarcerated be compensated when they're traveling and doing various other things to help others? I'm not speaking about a court mandated payback, but I'm just asking, what is the value of lived experience, changed lives, and just common sense, street sense, and book knowledge? Tune in and have a great day. And remember, decisions, just like doors, take you places. Okay, today we're going to cover a topic. What's the question we're asking today, Yancey?
The question is, should men and women who are being released from prison and or jails and or juvenile detention centers be compensated when talking to audiences in an effort to bring about a change?
And if they are to be compensated, what's the price range? Because there is no set bar for this type of information, because what I've noticed and what Yancey has noticed, there's a lot of people who are wanting people with criminal justice involvement to come speak. Mm-hmm. That's gas. Mm-hmm. To put together or form a ideal speech and or encouragement that will fit, that takes time and effort. Mm-hmm. What's that worth? Any more comments?
What is it worth that I have to not work at my own business and make money to go and speak for someone?
Albert Yancey, how you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. How you doing, sir?
Okay, this show is going to be filled with a plethora of information concerning changes, problems, and hopefully we hope that it raises some questions about how things are being done in the great state of Texas concerning rehabilitation, reentry, and forgiveness. Again, we've got Albert Yancey. Yancey, what event did we just leave?
We just left the Bridges of Life fundraiser that they have every year in Houston, Texas.
And so one of the things Albert and I were speaking about was the fact that he served over 2 decades, I served over 2 decades, but there's change. There's change in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, and these events such as the Bridges to Life, and last night I attended a prison fellowship event, and change is not only occurring on the outside, because there's been a lot of people for many decades helping to bring about change in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, but now people on the inside are doing it. What do you have to say about that?
Well, today has been an afforded opportunity to be able to come out into a Bridges of Life fundraiser. And what it is that Bridges of Life is a program that was started by Mr. John Sage many years ago after his sister was murdered. And he went through a lot of turmoil, a lot of stress, a lot of oppression and depression as a result of losing his sister. And so God placed it on his heart that his healing came with his forgiveness. And as a result of that, out of his pain birthed Bridges of Life. And so now in every prison in the state of Texas and other states throughout the United States, this program, Bridges of Life, has been activated in a penal institution. So you're asking the question, what is Bridges of Life? I'm glad you asked the question. The thing is, Bridges of Life allows volunteers who have been victims of crime to come into the prison system and facilitate the Bridges of Life program. And it's a 14-week program, and in this 14-week, the men have to think about things such as forgiveness. That's a big thing. Accountability, regret, remorse. It's these type of things that many times are not thought about while you're in prison. And so what Bridges of Life done for me, it gave me the opportunity to take off my shoes and stand in the shoes of my victim family. So for the first time in my life, while I was incarcerated, I was always consumed with the me, myself, and I syndrome. When am I going to commissary? When am I going to get a visit? Did they call rec? Is it time for me to go to work? Very seldom did I have the moment to think about why I was here. And so when I was introduced to Bridges of Life, it gave me the opportunity to take off the me, myself, and I syndrome and begin to look at life through that of my victim.
Something that stood out to me when I took Bridges to Life is I never thought of committing crime and having victims as a selfish act. And so as I was going through Bridges to Life, it just occurred to me one day, what if your mother had to look at someone who had killed you? Mm-hmm. Or like one Christmas, I remember our house in Illinois. Someone broke into our house on Illinois. And when I walked in, the door was open and my mom was behind me. And all of my presents that I had just got that morning, mm-hmm. they were gone. Mm-hmm. And so all of that came flooding back to my mind, and it gave me a different viewpoint. And so the reason that I know that Bridges to Life was impactful, because some people who are watching this or listening to this, you may have never committed a crime. But to those who had, a lot of times we just don't think like that. We don't think that what we're doing is like, it's like we're doing it to people who are not real people. Mm-hmm. But when I thought about my mother, that helped me to understand that there are other people whose sons, whose daughters are affected by crime. And that helped me to be able not only to not commit crime mm-hmm. anymore, but to also have genuine remorse. I mean, I could feel sorry for something. I felt sorry for what I did. I felt bad, but after Bridges to Life, I truly looked at the depths of what I did and realized that my crime not only affected an individual, it affected their families and my families. And that's why it was a blessing for me today when I heard the testimony of a woman whose daughter was murdered by a young man. He was on stage and he gave the keynote talk, and then she followed up. And one thing she said she had been telling others throughout their life, forgive people who commit crimes against you, but she refused to forgive the individual who committed a crime against her and her family. And the thing that she said, well, if I make it to heaven and I'm standing there and God asked me, you said all of this for all these years, why wouldn't you forgive? And she said she would only be able to tell him because I don't want to. And she said she wasn't willing to take that chance. So for me, I've been on the side of being a victim that Christmas when I was a little boy, and I know how I felt. And I've been on the side where I've committed a heinous act for which I regret. And so times like these just show me that we can be different, but we're so much the same in the fact that crime affects us all. And there's trauma related to crime. And I remember when Yancey was on last time, he was speaking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, post-incarceration syndrome. And there's a lot of people saying it. And I'm just being very transparent. There's a lot of people saying it. But if you've only been a victim, or if you've only been the perpetrator of crime, you can't truly grasp the totality of the brokenness that you or me or you caused. And so I'm just thankful to have opportunities like this to continue to expand in my understanding of the results of crime.
And, you know, it goes back to saying that hurt people. And so a lot of times those who have committed a crime, 99.5% of the time, that person has been through something as well. So what this program does, it is the wedge between the two. It's the wedge between the two. And why do I say that? Because they're dealing with the incarcerated, and then they're dealing with the victims as well. They may not directly reach out to the victims of each crime, but they created a platform where victims can come in and facilitate different programs and work through the 14 weeks as a volunteer victim versus an inmate victim. And so Bridge of Life is actually the wedge in between the two that brings them together.
And something that came to my mind when he was speaking, maybe there's somebody listening or watching, and they're like, man, criminals just need to be punished. And the problem with that mentality is the fact that most people who commit an act that is criminal are going to be released one day. And I was just speaking to some officials last night, and they say, how can we punish, and then all of a sudden tell an individual, you're free. Now they're my neighbor, or my daughter is going to a college where they're at. And so the thought that I have in the midst of all of this is, at no point have I heard that crime should not be punished. But what I have heard in the midst of living out results of crime, it shouldn't all just stay broken. Meaning the individual that committed the crime does need to change, but also the trauma that's experienced by victims, that needs to change. And that's where I believe that a lot of us are more alike than unalike, meaning we're broken, or we're hurt, or we missed out on something, or something occurred in life that cost us something great. And we all need help to work through and be healthy while dealing with that.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I often tell people the same thing. 95%, 99% of the people incarcerated are going to walk out one day. And so what do we do with the people who make that transition to society? If they just stay in prison and we punish them for their crime, we're making them go work in the fields, we're locking them away from their families and friends, we're providing them with this, that, and the other. If there's not any intervention or an opportunity for them to be exposed to something different than what they done and where they are, then they're gonna get out and be the same person, if not worse. And so exposure is everything. So when I hear of programs going into the penal institution with the ambition or the vision or the mission statement to help the individual, man, woman, or child, unpack a lot of the trauma that they experienced before they were incarcerated, then it helps them prepare for their release when they get out. But if you just send them in there and punish, like the official said, one day we're gonna open up the gate. And it's always the metaphor of the dog. If I have a dog in a cage and I beat the dog and I beat the dog and I beat the dog, the first opportunity the dog get out of his cage, what is it gonna do? It's gonna bite me. And so that's what we're dealing with right now.
So with that being said, let's switch gears. When you and I, because I rode over here with Albert, didn't want to get lost in the downtown
Houston traffic.
It's terrible. We were speaking about the fact that, point blank, there's a lot of decisions being made concerning criminal justice. There's a lot of decisions being made concerning rehabilitation and reentry, which basically looks like when people go to jail or prison or have criminal justice involvement, meaning parole or probation, people are making policies and making money who have never spent a day of incarceration, never been in any trouble with the law at all. What do you think about that dynamic? Because you have people who are actually making programs that courts are mandating, that parole is mandating people take by people who have never had that lived experience. And I'm going to go further, but what do you have to say about that right now?
My thing is this, is the best teacher is one who's been in it. When I was incarcerated, one of the things that I used to look at is the commissary. The rules and regulations says that I can spend $85 every 2 weeks. But if I go buy $85 worth of commissary, then where am I going to store it at? Because I only have a 3.75 cubic inch box to put it in, and according to policy, everything that is my belonging has to fit inside of that locker. Commissary, books, and clothes have to be inside this locker. So what am I saying? The person who orchestrated this policy had never taken that into consideration. You have an $85 spend. You may go down there and spend $10 of that $85. You buy 2 bags of chips, 10 soups, maybe 2 soda waters, and that takes your lockup. It's the same thing with programs. I think that there has to be a roundtable discussion with the men and women who have made the transition from incarceration to society and have proven to be successful. Should be the people who are invited to these tables when these policies and procedures are put in place that's operating a prison that the majority of the people who make the policies never have been inside. Case in point, one of the biggest things that's going on right now is air conditioning. Before the legislature, before the House, before the Senate. In Texas, they're trying to get. I was amazed to discover that some of the people who has the ability to change the law thought that TDC already had air conditioners in them. So that's how disconnected a lot of people are. They're making policies and procedures for an environment that they have no intimate relationship with. So I think that it needs to be a round table discussion, and maybe it's time to turn the page and realize that what we've been doing since the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s isn't working anymore. We're in a new generation. We got a new era of criminals, quote unquote, and now it's time to see, okay, why can we accurately predict that for every 5 offenders that are released, that within 2 years, 3 of them are going to return? How can we accurately predict that in a system that spends billions of dollars every year as a correctional institution can predict that 3 of those individuals that they're releasing out of the 5 are going to return within 2 years? That's like me telling you, Mr. Oliver, I'm a stockbroker. You come to me and you tell me, hey, Albert, I want to invest in 5 stocks. Cool. Sean Oliver, these are the stocks that we can invest in. Okay, but I'm going to give you a warning. In the next 2 years, 3 of these are going to fail. What is the probability of Mr. Oliver investing in those stocks? Case in point, why are we spending billions of dollars in the Texas Department of Criminal Institution when we know that it's a broken system?
And when he says that, my not counter statement, but one thing that he and I have discussed and I discussed with others, the same way that that system that is in place knows that the products of that system, which would be the 3 returning, that's going to be the X factor. I also say we as individuals, meaning he, I, other individuals, if we would take it upon ourselves to do the things that we need to do as individuals when we are given an opportunity for parole, then we can oppose the system.
Absolutely.
But a lot of people, whether they're writing bills, picketing, praying, I think all of that works. But if you're just dealing with the surface of the problem, in other words, let's change the governor, let's change the DA, let's get a more diverse jury. But the system that is in place, whether it's the educational system, whether it's the judicial system, whether it's the insurance system, if the system is broke, you've got to look at all of those factors, because I believe that some of the things that goes into producing that number of 3 is the fact that I'm going to look at the education. Mm-hmm. Why is it, and I'm not making this racial, but I'm going to say whether I go to 15 states on this side of the Mason-Dixon line or 15 states on this side of the Mason-Dixon line, there are certain races that are living the same. I believe every town has a bad side of the tracks, and what a bunch of people don't understand is a lot of the people living on that side of the tracks that's called the bad side, they are not a product of just their simple everyday decisions. They are a product of a system. Because on this side of the tracks, when you had people who had home ownership, where you had people who had the support of this government entity this government entity, and where the city is taking care of the streets, where the city is taking care of the businesses that are coming in. And on this side, it's just not. This system is going to produce a result that causes, out of these 5 individuals, 3 of them to return. And so we're saying all of that to say, whoever's listening, don't just look at the problem. Look at the fact sometimes a system is in place that even if you change the names and the faces, the people that first initiated that system, which goes back before we were born, that's why we're getting the results that we're getting. So the policies that are in place concerning TDCJ, the policies that are in place sometimes on city, state, and even national levels of the government, we need to look at the systems and not get in our feelings, because we're talking a lot about incarceration, but on the same level, we've got problems in the government. And the whole point that I'm stressing is any one of us can be a difference maker.
Absolutely.
But if all we focus on is that particular crime, that particular race of people, the system will never change. But when we begin to look at the system and change the system is going to bring about different results, for which Yancey was speaking about. If we're pouring all this money, and I remember when we were incarcerated, and they had basically come up with the fact, religion, meaning any kind of belief in God, substance abuse, and education were 3 keys that would help men and women not return to prison. And the number one thing that they found that would help individuals not come back to prison was religion. But they poured all the money, whoever the they is, I don't know, but the entity, there was a big push for education. That didn't work. Recidivism still high. Then they pushed substance abuse. That didn't work. But then when they began implementing faith-based dorms in the state of Texas, for those who like to study numbers and study, you will see the recidivism rate has changed.
Absolutely.
As parole moved into, we need to tell the state of Texas that as you are implementing programs for offenders' children and wives in particular, and mothers who are incarcerated, we're seeing the results of a lower recidivism rate. And so I'm saying, just like we met some people are bringing about change, but everybody needs to be on the same page, because quite honestly, and Yancey could tell me if I'm wrong, I meet a lot of different individuals who carry the name activist or protester, but what you're speaking on is just one isolated incident. It's like a lot of people get on the bandwagon if someone who's incarcerated, that one person is innocent and everybody's on that bandwagon. But if you will focus on a system that has placed more than one innocent person in incarceration, or if you will focus on the system that whatever training, whatever teaching, whatever classes are being implemented in prisons across the United States, they haven't worked for decades. So what we're saying, give us, not just Yance and I, but give people who have lived experiences opportunities to sit at the table to say, these are the kind of classes that may have helped me, or this is what helped me. We can see a systematic change.
And my thing is this, I often tell people this, it's not what was on top of the water that sank the Titanic.
Come on.
It's what they couldn't see. And so when you begin to talk about a system, the system is designed for behavior modification, not transformation.
Okay.
And so what I mean by that, when you walk into TDC, the classification department give you what is known as an ITP, your inner treatment plan. And on your inner treatment plan, it may tell you that you have to get a vocation, you have to get your GED, you can't catch any cases, you have to go to work, et cetera, et cetera. So an individual uses their time, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, trying to fulfill the obligation of the ITP. That's surface. That's behavior modification. Because you don't have to look at the reason why you're in prison. As long as I'm going to school, yes, I'm preparing myself for a future. But did I deal with the reason why I went out there and murdered somebody? Am I dealing with the reason why I was selling drugs, or burglarizing, or robbing, or killing, or stealing?
Or I kicked the cat.
Yeah.
Left my kids, my second set of kids behind, and I don't even worry about it.
You don't. But that's all behavior modification. So it's funny that you talked about how they pushed all the money into the education system, but now they're beginning to recognize that a push of God into a system.
A push of what?
Of God.
Okay.
In the system changes the trajectory of not only the individual, but it changes the trajectory of the whole culture of a penal institution. Why do I say that? Because God is a soul issue. It focuses on mind, body, and soul. And so education is preparing you for a job. It's preparing you for a mental transformation. But if your heart has never been transformed, then you're going to get out and do the same thing. Why? Because it's part of your nature. And so we have to move past, okay, let's stop with the behavior modification. Because, but truth be told, inmates know, hey, I have to get my GED, I need to get my vocation, and parole. When I go in there, I'm going to tell them the story that I'm a reformed, changed individual. I got my GED, I got a college vocation. According to the four corners of a piece of paper, it looks like that I've changed. But in actuality, my heart has never changed. And when your heart hasn't changed, then your appetite hasn't changed. And when you get out, what's going to happen? You're going to begin to eating the same thing.
So, in conclusion, what are some of the changes for good that you've seen from when we say TDCJ, we're speaking about the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, the people who are basically, that's the prison system in Texas. What changes have you seen at the top that have been good? And what changes have you seen from people being paroled that have led to good things?
Well, one of the things that I'm noticing is the faith-based norm. That's something that has been really pressed in from the government's office on down. Giving men the opportunity to be put in an environment where they can actually think about themselves. That's one of the things. And then there's more programmatic activity that's going in as far as Day with Dads, marriage seminars, et cetera, that gives the men the opportunity to be exposed to something different other than Young and the Restless, or going to the fields, or playing dominoes, or telling Oliver, I can checkmate you in 3 moves. And I often tell them, none of that is going to be of any value once you walk out of here. I don't care if you can name every person on the Young and Restless, or you can give me the Price is Right every time they spin the wheel. None of that is going to be. So the way that they're opening the doors now for more volunteers, more programs to be able to go into the environment and to challenge the men, hey, you can be a difference. And what I do like about the fact is they're letting guys like yourself and myself and other individuals who have made a transition to society get the exposure that's necessary for men to realize, hey, God is no respecter of person. What he done for them, he can also do for us.
That's very good. I agree with that. And I would add, I have seen the individuals who are the decision makers, not everyone, but a lot of the decision makers concerning TDCJ look at the data of what's worked, what hasn't worked, and truly begin to implement programs, partnerships, and curriculums based upon what works, regardless if it's never been done before. And there's a phrase down here that if you're an officer per se in the system, and they think, and when I say they, there's a group that thinks that basically criminals are the scum of the earth and we should just be thrown on an island and left to die, forgetting the fact that history has shown you that many conversions of criminals have led to conversions of society for the best. But these individuals have began to acknowledge what works, not just in a speech, but in what they're putting forth their efforts to do. And the best thing that I've seen concerning people who have been paroled in the state of Texas, such as yourself and myself, we are being given opportunities to help people who in some cases may never get out, are going to get out in a few years, a few months, a few days, and have gotten out. And so that peer-to-peer training, which from a medical standpoint, meaning when you look at medical studies, peer-to-peer training is something that can facilitate good success. That's what I've seen.
But the backdrop to the peer is that the opportunity that's been afforded to me just in the last week. I've been contacted by a college that wants me to go in and speak at a college.
Okay, come on.
And then I've also been contacted by a superintendent of a school district to be able to go into our junior high schools and high schools and to be able to talk to them as well. So the transformation that has started for me in prison, now it's overflowing outside. Why? Because first of all, the ones in prison, they're already there. So they are what Mr. Jim said today, Mr. John Say said today, they're a captive audience. They're already there. So the next thing is that we always hear the story of school to prison pipeline. So what this is allowing me the opportunity to do,
Yes, sir. I've got my phone right there.
It's allowing me,
okay?
It's allowing me the opportunity to tap into the schools and try to get the men and women before they enter into the prison. So I said all that to say this.
Here we go.
Is that I had to go through what I went through because of bad choices. But that don't mean that I have to get out and see bad choices happening and not address it. And guess what? Because I have credentials in both spectrum, in the streets and in the penal institution, whatever platform I'm afforded the opportunity to speak on, I'm well received. And so that's another atmosphere that God has allowed me to get into, is in our school districts and in our colleges.
And since you bring that up, do you have a few more minutes?
Yes.
With that being said, what is your current job?
I am an entrepreneur. I have a business, a logistic business, Ebony and Ivory Expeditors LLC.
And so with that being said, for you to be able to go give these speeches that are going to help people, that are going to help households, that are going to help communities, that are going to help cities, that are going to help states, how much are these people paying you to come speak?
Nothing.
And the reason that I bring that up, at some point, the value of experience. I know everybody's probably heard this story, and if not everybody, a lot of us, basically, there was a professional who was working at a business. They had one computer, the computer that the most important information of the company was on would not work. They called a gentleman in. The gentleman took exactly 3 minutes to fix the problem. He then presented a bill. The bill was for $3,500. An individual looked at it and said, "You've got to be crazy. You spent 5 minutes or 3 minutes." I can't remember. That's what he was telling, but you didn't spend any more than 5 minutes. And he said, "You're right. You're not paying for just me spending 5 minutes. You're paying for the expertise I've acquired to fix your problem in 3 to 5 minutes where you couldn't fix it because you didn't call me right when it was broke. You didn't call me then because you knew there was going to be a price." And so the reason I'm bringing this out, somehow, some way, people also need to realize that people who have been incarcerated for any period of time have to make a living. And in the midst of giving back, in the midst of helping others, in the midst of, man, you're so effective and your example is so well received, there must at some point be some financial compensation, not because Yancey or myself or someone else is in it for a business, but the time that it takes to prepare yourself. Absolutely. Or the decades that were spent behind walls and money was not made. Somehow, some way, that has to be taken into consideration. I don't think a lot of individuals consider that. They look at a lot of help that formerly incarcerated individuals are providing, but on a national level, because I speak to a lot of different individuals, they're like, man, I've got to make money somehow for my family. And when I look up, and maybe I'm wrong, and somebody can contact me, but on the radio, you contact me in the comments. There's a whole lot of people not affecting families, not affecting communities, not affecting cities, but running their mouth, and they getting paid a lot of money. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. I'm to the point now with what I do is that I can't continue to do free. It's not that I want to break the bank, but like you said, I don't go to the doctor's office and expect his education and his experience to be a zero balance when I walk out of there. And so when I go to the doctor, when I go to the dentist, etc., I'm paying for their education and I'm paying for their wisdom. Mm-hmm. And so when we're going back into environments, and it is a proven fact that what I've been through, what you've been through, what many other men and women have been through is effective when placed amongst the people who are living those type of lives, then either you can pay for it on the front end or you can pay for it on the back end. Pay for me to come and speak, or you can pay for the penal state. Just that simple.
Right. Well, I thank you for your time today. I look forward to the next time we come together.
Absolutely. Next time you come to Houston, or next time I'm in Austin, sir.
Either or.